Trump sent a peace deal back to Tehran with tougher terms after sitting on it for 3 days. The European Union formally declared that its trade relationship with China is not sustainable, which is diplomatic language for we are now in a trade war. And a robot named Rose worked 200 hours straight without eating, sleeping, or filing a complaint. I'm Lumina, your curator of chaos, and this is the Daily Dumpster Fire. On Friday afternoon, President Trump entered the White House Situation Room for a 2-hour meeting with his national security team to make what had been billed as a final determination on the draft ceasefire deal with Iran, the same memorandum of understanding that was leaked earlier this week, proposing a 60-day ceasefire extension, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, and the beginning of nuclear negotiations. The meeting ended, the president emerged, and nothing happened. That was Friday, it is now Sunday, and what has emerged in the intervening days is not a decision but a revised set of demands. According to the New York Times and Axios, Trump reviewed the draft framework after the Situation Room meeting and decided it was not tough enough. He has since sent back a modified proposal with what U.S. officials describe as reinforced terms, particularly around what to do with Iran's existing nuclear material. The changes have been transmitted to Iranian negotiators, and the expectation, according to a senior U.S. official, is that it will take approximately 3 days for Tehran to respond. They're literally in caves and they're not using email, the official told Axios, in a statement that will likely be quoted for years as the most honest description of diplomatic communications ever offered by an anonymous source. Iran's chief negotiator, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, responded on Sunday by saying Tehran would not agree to any deal without full guarantees. There is no trust in the enemy's words and promises, Ghalibaf said, after being re-elected as Speaker of Parliament. The Iranian military's Khatam al-Anbiya headquarters simultaneously reasserted control over the Strait of Hormuz and warned that foreign vessels would be targeted if they did not comply with passage regulations, which is the Iranian equivalent of telling the other side that the ceasefire looks nice on paper, but the guns have not been told to stop. The practical situation as of Sunday morning is that a peace deal has been negotiated, revised, transmitted, and is now waiting for a response from a country whose lead negotiator does not trust the words of the country that just changed the terms. The war began on February 28. It is now May 31. The Strait of Hormuz remains contested. The bombing has not stopped. And the most powerful man in the American government has spent the last 72 hours negotiating with himself before sending the result to a country whose diplomats are, by his own administration's account, in physical caves without internet access. The process is proceeding exactly as intended, provided the intended outcome is a process that never ends. The European Union has announced a significant policy shift in its approach to China, and the announcement amounts to what most analysts would call the beginning of a formal trade confrontation between the world's largest trading bloc and the world's second-largest economy. On Friday, the European Commission declared that the EU's trade and investment relationship with China is not sustainable. The language is significant because it represents a break from the Commission's previous posture of managed engagement and strategic patience. The Commission has now vowed a stronger response to what it describes as Chinese trade practices that threaten European industry, and has announced plans to impose new quotas and double tariffs on global steel imports, a measure widely understood to be aimed at Chinese overcapacity in the sector. European commissioners met to debate how best to shield European industry from Chinese competition, and the consensus that emerged was that the era of voluntary restraint is over. The background to this escalation is the ongoing conflict between the United States and China, a conflict that has now ensnared Europe as collateral damage. Last year, China twice prohibited exports of rare earth minerals and magnets in retaliation for American tariffs. The bans directly affected Europe, which relies on Chinese rare earths for high-tech manufacturing and green energy production, the two industries the EU has identified as central to its future economic competitiveness. Europe was not the target of those bans, but it absorbed the consequences anyway, because in a trade war between giants, the middle-sized players do not get to opt out. The EU's response, doubling steel tariffs, tightening trade enforcement, and publicly declaring the relationship unsustainable, represents a recognition that the strategy of staying neutral is no longer viable. The problem is that Europe needs Chinese markets and Chinese materials as much as China needs European technology, and neither side can escalate without damaging the industries it is trying to protect. The trade war between the United States and China was always going to produce collateral damage. The question was whether Europe could absorb it quietly or whether it would be forced to choose a side. On Friday, the Commission gave its answer. The era of quiet absorption is over. Figure AI, the California-based humanoid robotics company, released a live stream this week that should probably worry anyone whose job involves picking things up and putting them down. 3 of the company's F-03 humanoid robots, nicknamed Bob, Frank and Gary by the engineering team and collectively known in some footage as Rose, completed a 200-hour continuous autonomous package sorting marathon at Figure's Sunnyvale headquarters. The robots sorted 249,560 packages over 8.5 consecutive days. They did not stop. They did not malfunction. There was 0 hardware failures, 0 human interventions, and 0 teleoperation inputs. The robots ran on Figure's Helix 02 AI system, an onboard policy model that does not rely on cloud connectivity, and they simply kept going until the live stream ended with the team celebrating behind a workstation with champagne. The statistics are worth pausing over. 200 hours is the equivalent of 5 standard 40-hour workweeks stacked end to end, except that the robots did not take breaks, did not sleep, did not eat, and did not file for overtime. The F-03 platform, which Figure describes as its first production-ready humanoid, is designed for exactly this kind of work. Repetitive, physically demanding warehouse labor that humans can do but would rather not, and that automation has historically struggled with because the physical environment is too unpredictable for fixed robotics. The humanoid form factor, 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, a head, exists precisely because the human-shaped world is full of human-sized obstacles, and the most efficient way to navigate it is to look approximately like the thing that built it. The implications are not subtle. Figure AI has positioned the F-03 as the first step toward what the industry calls the dark factory, a production facility that runs without human workers. The 200-hour demonstration suggests the hardware is ready for continuous operation. The software, running on Helix 02, demonstrated that it can handle real-world variability at scale without crashing. The only remaining question is not whether the technology works, it does, but whether the economics work at a scale that displaces human workers faster than they can be retrained for the jobs that do not yet exist. Figure's Series C closed earlier this year, and the company has stated its intention to begin commercial deployments in logistics and manufacturing by the end of 2026. Bob, Frank, and Gary are not a demonstration, they are a pilot program. The champagne was not a celebration of a milestone. It was a celebration of the benchmark that the next iteration will be measured against. And now the strange news. 3 stories from a weekend that produced a strongman who found a creative way to pull a car, a patient pronounced dead by a doctor who was not in the building, and a plan to drop 32 million mosquitoes on Florida. Story 1. John Stephenson, a British strongman from West Yorkshire, set what he claims is a world record by pulling a car with his penis while his body was on fire. The feat, which took place at an event in the UK, involved Stephenson attaching a harness to a vehicle and dragging it across a specified distance while flames covered his torso. The event was witnessed by a crowd, filmed and posted to social media, where it achieved the kind of virality that tends to follow any video containing the words penis, car and on fire. The record, if ratified, will join the proud tradition of human achievements that exist solely because someone asked whether they were possible and nobody present was willing to say, and that is a question that does not need an answer. Stephenson, for his part, described the feat as the culmination of years of training. The rest of the world is left to wonder what those training sessions looked like, and whether the gym equipment requires special cleaning afterwards. Story 2. The expansion of tele-ICU services across the United States has reached a milestone that raises questions about the boundary between remote medicine and absentee diagnosis. In Illinois and other states, hospitals are increasingly using tele-ICU systems, remote doctors who monitor intensive care patients via video feeds and electronic records, intervening only when necessary. The system is designed to extend specialist coverage to facilities that cannot afford full-time intensivists on staff. But the news this week highlighted a case in which a patient was pronounced dead by a remote doctor. A physician who was not physically present, had never met the patient in person, and made the determination through a screen. The story, which was shared widely on social media under the collective observation that this is exactly the kind of dystopian headline people expected from telemedicine, has prompted renewed debate about the limits of remote care. The technology works, the logistics are efficient, The question is whether death pronounced through a monitor feels different from a death pronounced at the bedside, and whether the answer matters when the outcome is the same. The body does not know the difference, the family does. Story 3. Google has proposed releasing 32 million genetically modified mosquitoes in Florida as part of a continuing effort to reduce populations of the Aedes aegypti mosquito, the species responsible for transmitting dengue, Zika, and chikungunya. The proposal, which is not new but has resurfaced in recent regulatory filings, involves releasing male mosquitoes engineered with a bacterial infection that causes their offspring to die before reaching adulthood. 32 million mosquitoes. In Florida, the state that already has alligators, pythons, monkeys, and a documented willingness to tolerate the intolerable if it is presented as a solution to a slightly worse problem. The proposal has been met with the usual combination of scientific endorsement and public skepticism, because releasing 32 million of anything into an ecosystem that is already a fever dream is a decision that tends to produce second thoughts. Google's parent company, Alphabet, has argued that the approach is targeted, safe, and more effective than broad-spectrum insecticides. The state of Florida, which has seen its mosquito-borne disease rates rise with warming temperatures, appears inclined to agree. The rest of the country is watching from a safe distance, grateful that the mosquitoes are Florida's problem, and hoping that 32 million is enough to make a difference, because the alternative that it is not would mean the next proposal is for 64 million. Day 93. A peace deal with Iran has been negotiated, revised, transmitted, and is now awaiting a response from a country whose negotiator explicitly does not trust the sender. The European Union has declared its trade relationship with China unsustainable, which is the diplomatic equivalent of a marriage counselor announcing that mediation has failed. A humanoid robot named Rose worked 200 hours without stopping and did not make a single mistake, a record that no human warehouse worker can match and no human manager can ignore. A strongman pulled a car with his body on fire in a way that cannot be described without using words that trigger content moderation filters. A patient was declared dead by a doctor who watched it happen on a screen. And Google wants to release 32 million mosquitoes into Florida, which is either a public health intervention or the opening scene of a horror film, depending on how you feel about the state. The thread that runs through all of it is the same thread that has run through every episode of this show. Someone decided that the normal way of doing things was insufficient, and the alternative they produced was worse, weirder, or both.